This is the Rolling with Tay podcast. I'm your host, Tasia, aka Tay, and this is episode 11. My guest is Edmundo. I call him Ed, aka Ed. and we first met in 2018 at the Bronx Cranksgiving. I was super nervous to go. I saw about this. I don't even remember how I heard about this. Probably online or News 12 or something. And I was like, yo, that would be super dope to attend. And I had just gotten my folding bike not too long ago. So I'm super excited. I'm on my folding bike. I'm doing something good for the community. Maybe I'll meet some people. The event was dope. I had never seen parts of the Bronx like that. Like, it's a scavenger hunt. And then I'll have Ed explain more about it. But it's a scavenger hunt. and I had never been to certain parts of the Bronx. Like, I didn't know where the hell I was. I didn't even know these places existed. I definitely was like, I wasn't the last person back, but I was like the second to last person back. And Ed was one of the organizers, and he gave me, I think you gave me some inner tubes, and I was just happy. First of all, you asked me if I had a regular bike because I rode it in my pony bike, and I was just like, I'll get one. And he gave me the inner tubes anyway. And then from then on, and then the second time, God told this, I ran into him as I was riding my bike. He's walking his dog, and I was just like, I know you, don't think I'm weird. I just wanted to say hi to you. And then ever since then, we've been social media friends. We linked up a couple times. He's a super dope person, and I just want to thank you for being a guest on my podcast.
No, thank you. That was really dope to hear and kind of reflect on. And this is it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And just to touch lightly on some of your Cranksgiving story, not only did it kind of just fill me with some joy to like hear the experience that you had, but it also reminded me that we're doing something that I'm trying to be intentional on, or that when it comes to Cranksgiving, or Bronx Cranksgiving, I should say, because that's the one I'm responsible for, there are no losers. Like, nobody's a loser. You participate, you did your thing, regardless of first or last or a lot or a little. We came together, and there are no losers that day, so.
Thank you. Everyone was super cool. Everyone who participated, everyone who put it together. And, thank you for help organizing that.
It's truly my pleasure. It's one of those things that it just kind of just happened, as with a lot of stuff. When it's come to the bike and community for me, these were not things that I saw or ever envisioned for myself. It's just kind of as my life would progress in different avenues and ways, it would just come upon it. And Bronx Cranksgiving just happened. And the first time we did it, it was a 30-day turnaround from planning to day of. And it was all because the opportunity was there, and the people I reached out to and spoke to was like, nah, you got to do this. And with support, we pulled it off, and that was 5 years ago, and this will be year 6,
Nice. All right, we'll get into a little more of that a little later. I want to find out how you got into cycling as an adult, or were you always into cycling from a kid and then just transitioned into your adulthood?
So I got into cycling as an adult around 2011. I had been doing what I thought was like physical fitness and exercise, basically going to gym, walking on treadmill. I can't stand running. I still to this day do not like running. I walk forever, but I do not like to run. And I had a coworker and a good friend, separate people, who were into mountain biking. And I was like, yo, I loved biking as a kid. I was like one of my greatest joys. And I was like, that's cardio. I'm going to do this again. Like, let me find a bike. And I found a used bike. And I recommend to anyone listening, if you Start off with a used bike. I found a used bike with the help of those two friends on Craigslist. And I started mountain biking. I was like, holy shit, I'm out of shape. Yeah, a bike will quickly remind you how quickly you're not in shape, depending on what other physical activities you're doing. And then I was really having a good time. And shortly thereafter, I bought the bike. There was a charity event happening in Manhattan, which I believe it still goes on. It's called Bike MS. And I was going to do the 30-mile loop, which basically is a loop of all of Manhattan. They closed down the FDR, the West Side Highway, the Henry Hudson Parkway, and the Harlem River Drive. So you do a full loop of Manhattan car-free on the highways and parkways. But my buddy was like, yo, you can't use a mountain bike. Here, use my hybrid. And you have to raise money. You have to raise about $250. And it was just great. It was a great experience. I was kind of working my way up to 30 miles. I had never done nothing like that in my life prior. So I just kind of did it like 2 weeks. I just rode every couple of days. So that sensation of hitting that milestone for myself, knowing that I'm giving back and contributing. Oh, I was like, oh, this is great, but I also need something like this. And then little by little, in 2012, I got hit by a car at work. Yeah. And I was kind of like laid up at home and I was hurting, gaining weight, the usual stuff that happens when you're injured. And my shoulder was really busted. And I spoke to I'm forgetting the name. I spoke to the doctor and he was like, doctor, can I ride? Like, I discovered riding recently, and I was really having a good time. Like, well, what kind of riding you do? I said, I like to ride in the street and I also mountain bike. And he was like, well, no mountain biking, because that's going to really affect your shoulder, but you can stick to the road and the streets. And so I just started riding my bike all the time and everywhere because I wasn't working and I didn't want to stay home. I discovered the folks of Social Cycling NYC, so now I started finding community, and I just took that deep dive. And while falling in love with cycling, I was getting surrounded by the cycling culture. So for me, it just all kind of just worked out, and I'm sure I've seen your photos and seen some social media. And you've been really blessed to be surrounded by some dope individuals, strong cyclists. It was the same for me. I found some really knowledgeable folks, strong people who were welcoming. And I just found this community and I was like, this is amazing. I want all of this. And I just kept going. And yeah, that was 2011 and we're talking about 11 years now. It sounds kind of crazy to say it that way.
That's nice. That is nice.
Yeah.
Dang. So did you, from then, all right, so your first bike that you got on Craigslist, do you remember it? Do you remember what
I
kind
still
of bike
got it. I refuse to get rid of it. And it's weird. I only paid $250 for it. It's super outdated and it's old. But for some reason, that's my first bike. That's what started this journey and this path that I'm on. And I always tell folks that 3 things that really changed my life into like a major trajectory when the moment they happened was my son being born, getting hit by the car, and cycling. Like I really can truly say that my life wouldn't be anywhere it is at this point if it was not for cycling. Like it just put me on a way to discover things like you. I started discovering my borough and my city more.
Yep.
I met folks who were really borough minded, and I always had this Bronx pride. And this dope friend of mine, who at the time we weren't close, but now she's like my sister. She called me out. She's like, "What do you do for the Bronx? Like you say this, you say that, but what do you do?" You know, and she was part of advocacy, and she was doing work with like transportation alternatives and other folks. And that's when I learned about community. I was like, wait a minute, there's a lot of shit we don't get just because we don't ask for it.
Yep.
Like mind blown, but I'm 30 years old, you know? So it just kept going down that path. So I still got the bike. It's a Marin Mulewoods. No, I'm sorry, wrong bike. It's a Gary Fisher Sugar 4 Plus full suspension mountain bike. I have not been mountain biking in like 2 years. And that was one of the things that I was hoping to maybe get back into in this fall. but mountain bikes are expensive. Holy shit. They are expensive. And I'm a heavy dude. I'm like 240, so I just can't ride anything.
Yeah. Oh man. Oh, that's super dope. Now speaking about uh, the Bronx and what you've done for the Bronx and what you're doing for the Bronx, let's go back a little bit and talk about the Bronx Thanksgiving and then how you know that formed and then your involvement in it.
Yes, yes. So around that time, around the 2012, 2013, I learned about Thanksgiving NYC. And it had been a long running event where basically it's a charity event, a scavenger hunt, very much like what we do in the Bronx Thanksgiving. It had got started by New York City Bike Messengers as a way to give back to the homeless community during the holidays. And I heard about it. My friends who in the cycling community said they had done it or were trying it. So I was all for it. I went out, had a great time. It was like such a sense of community. There's
Mm-hmm.
also this sense of competition. So I'm pushing
Yep.
myself and so you could treat it as a race, you could treat it as a ride. And in my mind, I'm racing. In my mind,
Mm-hmm.
I'm fast. I did good. I was not a top finisher, but I felt I was very respectable in my
Yep.
finishing that first time. And then after that, I was like, I'm coming back. And then I found out someone had won like best costume just for like wearing a hat or something. So I was like, yo, next year I'm wearing a turkey costume. And the following year, I came back in the turkey costume. I linked up with some friends. We had a grand old time, but this time I was like, I'm not racing, I'm riding. We're just chilling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I had kind of been giving shit to the organizer, who's a super dope dude, and we're friends now. But it started off really kind of sketchy because the after parties will often be in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was on a very anti-Brooklyn trip because the cycling community and culture and almost everything was always pushing towards Brooklyn, Brooklyn, Brooklyn. That's when
Yeah.
downtown Brooklyn was booming. And as a Bronx head, I'm like, yo, that's a 2-hour bike ride home all the time.
Yeah.
And so I had become very anti-Brooklyn, and I was giving him some grief. But then he communicated with me, and we talked, and we developed this respectable relationship. And I understood what he meant because that's when I kind of started organizing events myself. The first one was with Laura Solis when we did the Bronx Bike Swap,
Mm.
and I had already been organizing bike rides, so I started understanding the difficulty of accessing space, especially space you don't pay for, where
Mm-hmm.
it's free. Um, so then we got cool, and he had lost a sponsor or wasn't working with a sponsor, which at the time was Brooklyn Brewery. And as you know, or most
Yeah.
people who are listening, bikes and beer are very synonymous with one another.
Yes.
So he hit me up, and he had known that I had relationships with the Bronx Brewery and other breweries in the Bronx. And he was like, "Yo, you think you can make a connection?" I was like, "Hey, I can send you over my contact." And I connected them, and the Bronx Brewery was like, "Hey, we'll give you a bunch of free beer, and you can even host your party here." And he was like, "Yo, Ed, I'm not bringing a party up to the Bronx because cyclists don't come up to the Bronx. Like the outer boroughs don't ride into the Bronx. So you have access to the space. They offered it to me. That might be something you might want to jump on. And instead of Thanksgiving getting involved in the Bronx, you could do your own spinoff."
Mm-mm.
And I was like, man, that really wasn't what I was asking for. I was just asking for some Bronx representation, not my own thing. I had never done anything like that. I confided with Laura Solis
Mm-hmm.
and some other folks, and they were like, "Nah, you got to do it. You got to make it happen." So I reached out to the brewery, and they were saying like, "Yo, use the space. We'll hook you up with some swag." And I just started reaching out to different businesses and establishments, and everybody was like, "Nah, we got you. Say no more." Chrome was like, We'll give you 2 free bags," because that was enough that I was always intentional on. I was like, prizes have to be equitable for
Yeah.
men and women because in cycling it's often not the case.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody was just super supportive, and it was like as chaotic and crazy as it was, kind of just all came together, and it was literally a community effort. And I don't remember if I just answered your question. I'm sorry, I'm rambling.
No, you did. That is super dope. No, you definitely did. Yeah, and thank you for bringing it to the Bronx,
I'm,
having Bronx Thanksgiving.
I'm happy it's here. We've been able to collaborate and work with some really dope folks. Every year I feel overwhelmed, but also really surprised. Last year was with the pandemic. I was like, man, we're not doing this. This is crazy. I'm not trying to put nobody in a position to get
Yeah,
sick,
of course.
you know. But then people were asking, sponsors were asking, and that's something that was like, whoa, it's usually hard to get stuff. And they're even like, hey, are you doing this? We got stuff to give you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like, holy shit. And we pulled it off, we got it together, and come to find out it was the biggest turnout from
Ooh,
all the 5 years that we ever had. It
wow.
was like 82 participants. Uh, and I know for other boroughs, for Manhattan and even Brooklyn, that started up right after we started up. Those numbers aren't maybe any crazy for them, but to
Mm-hmm.
have 82 people riding a bike, that's like
Exactly.
wow, that's crazy on a Saturday, maybe chilly November morning. That's and we collected the most food we ever collected.
Mm.
We've been able to collaborate with different organizations. It started off with BronxWorks, but now we got even more grassroots. And we last year we did it with Loving the Bronx. We have a home in the Point CDC. They were like, "Yo, so long as you want to be here, you're welcome." So and this is all donation, all support.
Mm.
We have a budget of zero, and we just make it happen every year with volunteers and good people.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So for everybody listening, come out to Bronx Cranksgiving, all right?
Yeah, yeah. So just so folks, and I make it really easy to remember. You participated one year, you can always remember. It's 2 Saturdays before Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
It's always easy, or the Saturday after the marathon. Those are the two ways you can always remember. It's the week after the marathon, or 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. That way, all the food that gets collected, we can distribute it to the community members in need and ensure that they got something to eat. If not for a little while, at the very least, the holidays.
That's amazing. Super dope. Now, with the food, is it something that you guys handle yourself or you give to an organization and then they hand it out to families in need?
So that's how we did it the first few years. We was just giving it a Bronx Works. And I just want to mention something I forgot earlier. Another draw for me with the Cranksgiving was that whole history and connection to homelessness
Mm-hmm.
and food insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
As someone who grew up household with two other siblings, working class poor, it was very relatable to me.
Mm-hmm.
To the point that I didn't realize I was homeless as a kid until I was much older. And I was like, oh, that was us being homeless. I thought it was just normal to move. I thought it was just normal to live in other people's houses. So
Mm.
that was another thing that was really special to me about Thanksgiving in itself. That also, and by that time I had learned a little bit more about the Bronx, and that's when the whole Bronx opportunity popped up. It was just like you can't turn away from
Yeah.
this. And to answer your question, we started off. We was giving off the food to Bronx Works, and I'll be honest, they were great. They were great partners, but I just felt that it was too much of me. And now I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, yo, y'all got bank, y'all not just no regular nonprofit. Y'all got big money, and then y'all just coming, scooping up the food and bouncing.
Mm-hmm.
And don't get me wrong, they were appreciative. There were good people over there, but I was like, I need a more deeper connection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So then the following year, I linked up still via BronxWorks, but I linked up with a very specific community center, which is the Betances Community Center
Mm-hmm.
in by St. Mary's Park. And the head person there was like, "Yo, this is amazing because we used to do a food drive every year, and that person backed out due to financial reasons.
Mm.
And community members have been asking if we're going to be able to give them food, and we were telling them we didn't know. So she was like, "Yo, we're so on this." So we gave the food directly to them, and they were able to feed about 5 or 6 of the buildings that surround the
Wow.
Betances Community Center. Yeah, so it was dope. And then the year after that, I linked up with a Catholic church over in Highbridge. That's a women's shelter
Mm-hmm.
and women and small children. And similarly, they were saying they were having financial struggles, so we gave all their food all the food that was collected. We gave it to them, and they were able to use it for their kitchen that houses the women, while also providing the women who have small children baby food. So that's something else that we're always very intentional on. That I also learned from Thanksgiving NYC is that we always ensure baby food is one of the required food items. Because when
Mm-hmm.
people hear homeless, most people just think adults,
Yeah.
and they forget how many times it's family and small children. I used to have stats and numbers when I would talk to people, and it's escaped me right now, but you'd be surprised the percentage of homeless folks are children.
Mm.
So getting a little emotional, sorry. So yeah, so we hooked up with them. And then from there, last year I was able to hook up with Loving the Bronx, and they did a food drive. And then I also linked up through all through community member relationships. I
Mm-hmm.
linked up with someone called from Rebirth. I'm gonna mess up the name. I believe it's Rebirth Bronx, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
They're a grassroots collective of folks that ensure that women and children have like diapers, baby food, and all their needs. So we gave them that, and they was able to feed like 100 and something families from the food collected. Love in
Wow.
the Bronx was able to feed almost 150 plus households. So it's just been dope. I try to ensure that we're very intentional
Yeah.
with who we're giving it. And
Mm-hmm.
truth be told, that was one of the reasons why we also left Bronx Works, because one year they asked to use the food for a food workshop, and they were also going to give out food bags. But I'm like, yo, y'all got money. Y'all don't need to use this food for a workshop. Like,
Exactly.
y'all got money. So then I was like, nah, we need to find someone more connected to the community. So, and that's where we at right now. August is the month that I usually start reaching out to folks and be like, hey, I want to remind y'all that this is what's going to happen in November, and kind of start seeing, do we have a place? There was one time that one year Thanksgiving was homeless. The venue we were going to host it at had to shut down.
Mm.
And luckily for us, My Haven Bar and Grill, which is just celebrated its last a few months there. Rose is the owner. I spoke to her. I told her that what the event was about, and she provided us with access to her event space totally free of charge. She
Wow.
did not know me from a hole in the wall. I was just another customer who would get drunk during brunch. And she supported, you know. Yeah, so that's kind of been the way, connect to the community as much as we can.
That's super dope. And that's amazing. Like, I commend you and your whole team for, like I said, for putting this together, and then like making sure food gets to the right people, especially like when you donate stuff, like, and who is this going to?
Yeah,
This some of this stuff leaves the community. I'm like, what,
yeah.
and I just want, like, when I donate stuff, like, it gets to the people. It gets to the people in the community that needs it the most.
Mm-hmm.
So that's super dope. Switching gears just a tad bit, you are super involved in your community. And like we said, the Bronx, anything dealing with the Bronx. Um, I could hit you up like, hey, I remember when I hit you up about the Bronx market. I'm like, hey, did you hear about this? She was like, yeah, I heard about it. Like,
Yeah,
I just found out about this.
yeah, it's a lot going on. That's still stuff I'm finding out about all the time, but that's dope. It's like, and I was one of those people that always thought there's nothing happening here, and I used to go to other places,
Yeah.
and I was like, well, no, there's a bunch of stuff happening. You just need to pay attention.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So, what is your involvement with Concrete Plant Park? And then why is that important to you and for the community?
Okay, awesome question, and thank you for asking that. So Concrete Plant Park is a park along Westchester Avenue, it's literally my neighborhood park. It was once the site of a concrete factory,
Mm.
which hence the name. From like the 40s to then they had some tax issues, and they were supposed to shut down. They kept operating illegally, and then one day they just up and left, and they left the buildings with like running water, electricity, and this was in the Bronx in the late 80s, early 90s. So for folks who may not be aware, it was a very there was a lot of addiction issues. There was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of other societal issues that were happening that would take advantage of a space like that. So it became a place for squatters, for
Mm-hmm.
users, and things of that nature. no one would go down there. And through the work and advocacy work and organizing of mostly young people, supported by local community nonprofits and grassroots organizations, they brought enough attention and highlighted that area that it needed water, that this community needed waterfront access, where they got parks in the city to purchase that land and turn it into a park. So my connection to the park is that it's a neighborhood park, and again, I was one of those folks I wouldn't go there too often, just because it was like you didn't really know what's down there. There wasn't much to do once you got in there, and if you knew the history, it's a little sketch, and it looks sketch from the Westchester Avenue entrance. But around 20, as I started getting involved in different stuff, I started like volunteering with this organization called Bronx River Alliance. And there was a meeting happening because they was going to bring a foodway to Concrete Plant Park. It was this new thing, like we're going to grow food publicly that's edible and medicinal, and people can consume it and pick it and forage at their leisure. And I was like, yo, this sounds wild. This was dope, because there was part of a project that was called Swales, a floating food forest that was docked there at the park. And I saw this big boat, and I made some connections, and we talked. So they was like, remember what was on the boat? That's going to be in the park now. So I'm like, whoa. And then there was all that development happening along the Sheridan. I heard about buildings. You see the buildings getting built. So I joined these meetings because I was like, I want to be informed and involved, because I don't want my neighborhood to be the next downtown Brooklyn. Whereas like development, these beautiful things, but they're not for me. Yep. So I started getting involved, and then a few of the residents and the neighborhood folks, we got together and we created this group with the help and support of some people in some really dope positions and nonprofits, where we started Concrete Friends. And basically we're a friends group. And for folks who don't know what a friends group is, you advocate for a certain space or park. You volunteer, you activate the space, you ensure. So our goal is to ensure that Concrete Plant Park and the Foodway remain for the community, because it's a park that got started by the community. So anything that's happening in there should be community centered, focused, community led. If it's not about the community, then it shouldn't be happening there. Find somewhere else to do that. And we just, we've been growing. We've been getting supported by different organizations and groups of people. So it's really dope. Like, we actually got an event this Saturday. We're hosting an event where there'll be opportunities to have art therapy. We've hosted different type of workshops where there's like food. We've supported other stuff. It's a group of people who have come together through their love of the park and community to uplift both of those things, the park and the community.
I like that. I like that a lot. Damn. You know what?
Look, I'm one of those folks. I used to complain about what was around there, and then I realized a lot of this stuff, I'll be honest, sometimes I'm really overwhelmed. I'll be feeling burnt out. And there's some dope individuals who really support me and listen to me and hear me out, or I lean on, I use their knowledge or their experience. But it's like, yo, this is my hood.
Exactly.
And if we don't do it, either it doesn't happen, or the people who will make it happen probably don't look like us, don't come from where we come from, don't have the same interests.
Exactly.
So we can't lose what we got, even if it's not ours. We gotta hold this until it becomes ours.
Wow, dropping gems here. Dropping gems. Make me want to join the community board. No.
Word, yo, but we need
Yeah.
People think community boards are dope. It's mostly old people who don't think like the younger folks, and that's one of the things that is like, they're almost like gatekeepers. They don't always have the community representation in mind. Like, how many people on that community board are undocumented? Probably none. How many people in that community board are currently homeless? Probably none. But you're making decisions for us. So that's exactly the stuff. And I didn't know about community boards till I was 30 years old. Meanwhile, they're making decisions for me.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Everything because they have to disclose what they're going to do within the neighborhoods. So if you go to those community board meetings, you know exactly what's going on. I went to one a couple years ago, and they were talking about putting a bike lane on Southern Boulevard, and the community were like, no.
Yeah.
No, it's hard time finding parking anyway. We do not need it there. Sure enough, there is a bike lane. And I knew about that prior to, and I was just like, okay.
But
And sure enough,
but I'll
started
keep it.
one.
I'll keep it a buck. As someone who does that kind of advocacy work of trying to get bike lanes and stuff like that, I also know that when if you're not a cyclist, when you see bike lanes, you're thinking, I'm losing parking.
Yeah.
You're thinking this neighborhood's about to get gentrified. You're thinking this ain't for me.
Yeah.
I remember the expansion of Starlight Park that's happening behind my house that I'm like super involved with now. When it first started, I was one of those community members at that meeting saying, no, I want the used auto junkyard behind my house because at least I know that they got dogs. Ain't nobody jumping from behind my house into my building, as opposed to this random park where there's no security. So the fear of the unknown tends to kind of stop us from that progress, So it's like you don't know what you don't know,
Yeah.
and then you're scared of it.
Yeah.
So I understand the pushback on bike lanes, and I understand as someone who drives, I understand the pushback on parking. And that's why I always say, like, if we put better pressure on our electeds to provide us with a true public transportation system, most people won't drive if it's cheaper and it makes more sense and faster to use another means of transportation, which is why I love the bike so much, because most places I get to quicker.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially during like rush hour, I'm like, no, I'm just gonna ride my bike.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in traffic. I'm not gonna find a parking spot. So going back to the biking, how do you see, or do you see the Bronx biking community change from when you started to now? Okay, we see more bike lanes, but do you see more people cycling in the Bronx?
Yes. So it's like yes and yes, but it's for two different reasons. So I think it has just been growing more as like when I first started, most people who rode out of necessity, especially in the poorer neighborhoods. You either couldn't afford it or you lived in the old school two-fare zones. And for the folks who are too young to understand what that is, that was before Metro cards existed. You couldn't transfer from the bus to the train or the train to the bus. So if you're one of those folks, it was cheaper to kind of bike ride. If you're undocumented and your money's kind of tight, you bike ride. So when I started around 2011, 2012, there was some bike lanes that were normally put in areas that didn't make no sense. And that was the city's way of saying, we gave you bike lanes. But it has grown. It has gotten better because I think it had the understanding behind it, and credit to the city, the pushing it through even when maybe certain people don't want it has helped expand it. What I will give extreme amount of credit to, I'm loving where the biking culture is out in the Bronx right now, and I give extreme credit to that, to the pandemic. When people couldn't travel and couldn't go nowhere, all I started seeing was people on bikes, groups, like different cycling groups, different cycling clubs, and people coming together like that. And I know what happened. Same thing when the transit strike happened some years ago.
Yeah.
Once people start riding a bike out of necessity, they kind of start falling in love with it, or they pick it up more often, where it's not just sitting there and being used as like a clothes hanger, So yeah, it's grown greatly, and I think that was one of the good things about the pandemic. There's a lot of hardships and sorrow that comes with it, but the bike boom, the sense of community, seeing all these mutual aids pop up, community fridges and community members supporting one another. I think those are all dope, because that's ways that we can see that we don't have to rely on government. We don't have to rely on companies or organizations. Like we can provide each other with what we need and want, So yes, biking has blown up. I'm loving it. I wish I could make all the rides and all the meetups. I love that there's a woman specific only group in the Bronx.
Yeah.
I remember when I first started cycling, I was really blessed to be part of a group that women were represented and leading. But when they wanted to do like the women's only ride, I used to like, what's that about? Like, why y'all doing that for? Not understanding the totality of the culture. When then as I started expanding more, I started realizing, oh, they do need their own space, and not just realizing on my own. It was difficult to have conversations with friends that I really respected. But that's how a lot of progress is made or things are learned. People who care about you or respect you, they pull you over and like, hey, we need to talk about this. You're moving wrong. And I was one of those folks that was pushing up against we don't need women only bike rides.
Mm-hmm.
We need
Mm-hmm.
more social rides to get more people out.
Mm-hmm.
And then I learned that I was wrong on that one. So to see a Bronx specific bike group, beautiful. I would have never thought that would have happened 5 years ago when I first started. That was dope. So
Yeah.
it is dope because they're doing their thing. Shout out to them.
Yeah, shout out to the Bronx Girl Bike Gang. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the name too. The fact they got the word gang in there. Yes. Let's break down what that word means.
Yeah, that's super dope. I've ridden with them a couple times. Everyone's super cool. Yeah, shout out to them.
Yeah. Hope to see them in Thanksgiving.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I believe Black Girls Do Bike came out this past year and had a nice
Nice.
representation, and some
Nice,
of them came
nice,
out from
nice.
early. So yeah, I've been
Yeah.
loving seeing the whole. The first one that I saw of that nature was We Bike NYC.
Mm-hmm.
But truth be told, it was like mostly white women and mostly from like Brooklyn or affluent areas.
Yeah.
So to see like these the representation from different communities, whether it's boroughs, genders, seeing all of that happen and having seen these inclusive spaces, I get it. I
Yeah.
get it. I understand it. And it's so beautiful to see. It
Yeah.
really is.
It is. I just love the different groups of cyclists. I was telling my friend Serena, who I interviewed, it is a resurgence of a lot of these Black cycling clubs, because back in the early 1900s, if you look at old newspapers, there were so many Black cycling clubs. And you know why we had to have our own, because we weren't admitted into other ones. So, but that didn't stop us. They were like, all right, well,
Exactly.
we're going. And it's so crazy to see like the parallels, because they're doing the exact same thing, from having social events to having rides, to having races, it's so cool to
To give
see.
it back.
Yes, all of it. And I'm just like, this is so dope. So yeah, I
And
love
and
it.
and what I love about it too is I think I feel really blessed to be at a time where technology is supporting us and helping us,
Yeah.
because our ancestors were doing that, and I'm going to use this word intentionally, in very segregated spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Like they didn't know what was going on maybe 100 miles away.
Yeah.
But now we could be like, yo, there's an event happening where I'm packing up my car, I'm going there, I'm
Yeah.
representing. Yo, I went to Philadelphia Thanksgiving, time of my life. And I also learned, yo, there's a different way to do this.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, yo, can I incorporate some of yours into what I'm doing in the process? He's like, yo, please. And they help explain. They send PDFs. I mean, like that sense of community and culture, that it really does become like a sub family,
Yeah.
where you have this group of people who only they really kind of get you and understand you
Yeah.
in ways that other folks can't. And like you said, there might be some days you want to go on a fast-paced ride where you're barely talking. You know where to find that group.
Yep.
There might be days where you're like, I just kind of want to cruise, maybe drink a beer, eat a donut. You know where to find that group too. Even
Exactly.
or even better, go solo. The first time I saw you on Bronx River, you were solo,
Yeah.
and I was like a Black woman on a bike on Bronx River. Yo, what's up? And you was like, we met before, and I was like, oh shit, this happens to me a lot, and that's because I be doing too much and be drinking. But yeah, thanks for reminding me about that. That was a great encounter that day, and I was so excited. I was like, yo, I met a Black woman cyclist today.
Right.
We used to call them unicorns. My friend Laura used to call them a unicorn. That's how often you didn't see them in the hood.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and now everywhere you turn, boom, there's unicorns. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that I could, I'm representing, you know, so much. Like I'm out here on this bike. I'm in the Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a black woman.
Mm-hmm.
I like I would tell my friend, I'm like, people are staring at me. I don't know if they're staring at me because I'm a black woman on a bike. I'm on a bike. It's kind of cold. I don't know. They so many reasons. I'm just
It's
like,
all of it. It's all of it.
I'm just like, I don't know. Um, oh man. So what does cycling mean to you? Like what I know that you spoke earlier how like it helped change your life in so many ways. What does it mean for you physically, mentally, like if you can explain.
Yeah. So, man, something I never really had to think about, but I'm sure I probably said it in different ways before. It's the first. So I recently got into meditation,
Mm-hmm.
and I will say that it's been extremely helpful for anyone who has tried it and hasn't worked for it. Keep trying. It's not like anything else where you're just gonna get it. That's why they call it a meditation practice. You have to keep doing it for a while before it works. Um, so I had that was the first time I had experienced like this bliss on the bike. I
Mm-hmm.
was riding and all my worries, all my troubles were just
Mm-hmm.
like gone. My brain felt clear and it was like, whoa, I want more of this. So for me, it's a way to feel grounded. If there's times that I'm not really in a good space, I'll be like, you know what? I need to jump on the bike.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to me to support my community, whether it's not polluting or getting around quickly. Like there's just it's just such an anchor into so many different uh uh not just parts of my life, but goals and aspirations. Like I started traveling. I've been to Puerto Rico on my bike a few times. I've been to Austin, Texas
Mm.
with my bike. I went to Portland, Oregon. My homies over there loaned me a bike. Like there's no better way to see or experience the city or area. It's just has this really, really central, it's a part of my life. Like I don't I cannot envision me not riding. I cannot
Mm-hmm.
envision, like, that's nothing I love, being on these group rides and you see people in their 70s and their 80s and they
Yeah.
out there doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yo, I want that. And what else can you do that you could be like, what other sport can you do that you still holding your own, well into your twilight years, where your only competition at the end of the day is actually you.
Yeah.
You're your only competition on that bike. So it's grounding, it's inspirational, it helps me get fit and clear my mind. It's just a big anchor. It's just, but a good anchor.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real stable place for me. So I love it, and I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. It does. I feel the same way. Whenever I'm going through something, shucks, I'm on a bike when I'm happy or like you said,
Yeah.
I'm just like, I'm not feeling too great. Let me get on this bike. And I
Hmm.
always feel better.
Hmm.
Like I always feel better. I just rode 100 miles Saturday in
Kudos.
Jersey.
I've only done that once.
Thank
That
you.
was an amazing experience. And every time I see folks like you and my other friends killing it, I'm like, go, 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 get it.
That whole time I'm on that bike, I'm just like, Tasia, what am I doing? Like
Yeah.
mile 80, I was just like, man, I don't know if I'm gonna make it. My phone dies, my Garmin dies. I'm just like, and I'm just thinking in my head, like, you know what? Regardless, this is fun. Like I had such a good time. Body was my legs were starting to cramp up, body's aching a little bit, but I'm challenging myself mentally and physically. I'm not gonna lie, I was so happy to get off that bike and finish, but I even through the cramping and the pain and just my butt hurting. I was happy. Like,
Yeah.
it was a good ride. It's always a good ride. It's always a good time when I'm on my bike, regardless of what. And once I get off, I sat back and I was like, I did that.
Yes, I was just gonna say that. Like that's one of those feelings that I love. And whether that's knocking out a new mileage
Yep.
or a new milestone for yourself,
Yep.
or literally just going up a hill that you could never accomplish.
Yep.
And I've been there so many times, like, why? Or you get caught in the rain
Yep.
and you're like, yo, why the hell I'm into this? This is crazy. But then when you do it, when it happens, that sense of joy, that sense of accomplishment, you're like, this is an amazing feeling that I just never want to not have.
Exactly.
You know?
Yep. The joy of cycling.
Oh
The
man, yeah.
joy.
We should, I feel like that should be like a Bob Ross inspired type of show. The joy of cycling.
The joy of cycling.
You know, we have someone very soft spoken talking about components. You know, and you know, you got to have the shirt open with the chest hair.
All right, we're coming up with shows right now, so we got to put that into motion. Right?
If you're listening, that's already been trademarked.
Exactly, it's ours. Oh man, and I want to thank you for on my podcast. Definitely want you to come back and talk some more about Cranksgiving and all the other things that you're doing within the community in the Bronx and cycling. So we'll set that up later in the year.
For sure.
Yeah, I really appreciate you. So yeah, I'm about to wrap it up. This is the Rolling with Tay podcast.
If I may interrupt you,
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to give you some shout out and credit. Not just not even for having me, but for the way you've been moving, pun intended, through this community, and really establishing your own lane, your own self, your own identity, and killing it. You know, I've been watching you. It's been dope to see, from the small brief interactions that we have to the side conversations. And when I see you post a ride or when I see you link up with certain people, I'm like, yo, dope people with dope people. That makes me so happy. You know, and I just want to give you the kudos and the respect that you deserve, that you know, you doing your thing as well, and you should have somebody on one day interview you, because you're just as worthy of having everything that you're doing and a part of being told and spread out there. So shout out to you and thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Maybe you can interview me.
We'll figure it out. We'll talk about it.
Oh man. All right. Thank you for listening to Rolling with Tay podcast. I'm your host, Tasia, aka Tay, and this is episode 11.